Yoorrook Justice Commission is now in session.
Good morning. We welcome everybody present here today at Charcoal Lane. We thank Auntie Eileen for the smoking ceremony, which we had out at the front for our witnesses, commissioners and council. This is the second day of Yoorrook's Wiratjarang or public hearings, at which we are receiving truth-telling evidence from elders. Next week, some contextual evidence from the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs and the representative of the First Peoples Assembly will be heard. Before we get started, Commissioner Hunter, would you like to say anything as an acknowledgement? You're right, okay. We've had...
Can't hear properly.
Pardon?
She can't hear properly.
Oh,
Yeah. Just pull the microphone a bit closer to you, Aunt. Yeah.
can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
No, it's not coming through the microphone. It's really faint from the room.
Oh, have we got an issue? Could can someone else just speak from their mic just to see?
Can you hear me, Commissioner Hunter?
No, there's a sound issue.
Can you hear me?
No.
There's an audio technical issue.
Have we got sound yet? Commissioner Hunter, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes. Yes, now.
Clear? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner Hunter, for that sound check. We needed it. We didn't know we had the issue. I'd just like to... Now, I've got echo. We've got an echo. Is that... am I clear now?
Yeah.
Good, thank you. Council, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. This morning I appear with Mr Goodwin and Ms Fitzgerald to hear from Yoorrook's second witness, Uncle Johnny Lovett. And he's here with us. I might ask you, Uncle Johnny, to introduce your support members, Joey and Peter.
Yes, we've got Joey Saunders here. He's my support member. He's family to me. And I consider him as one of my many grandsons, traditionally way. And it's a great comfort to have him here. And another great friend of mine is the retired Mr. Federal Court Judge Mr. Peter Gray. We have a long association of friendship and music, and it's good to have him here with me. Yeah, thank you.
If I can just deal with the formalities first. As you know, I will be taking you through your evidence today. And may I call you Uncle Johnny?
You may.
Yeah, thank you. Could I invite you to introduce yourself to the Commissioners?
Yes, my name's John Maxwell Lovett. I was born in Hamilton 1947. I'm a descendant of the Gunditj Jamara Bowendict people, and through my mother and father's connections, I have relationships in custom and tradition to other groups, and in my travels across Australia I've become a family member of other people in other areas, so I feel very privileged to be here today. And I realise how important this is going to be for the future of Aboriginal people in this state, and after this maybe many others.
Uncle Johnny, you've prepared a statement for the Commission with the assistance of the legal team. That's correct?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
And do you have a copy of that in
I
front
do.
of you? The Commissioners also have a copy of the statement, the ballot Kitiara of Uncle Johnny Lovett. Uncle, have you had an opportunity to read that statement?
I have had some sort of an opportunity to look at it, yeah,
Right.
yeah. I've discussed it a few times, yeah, so I'm pretty right to go
Right.
with it, yeah.
I might ask Uncle Johnny for you to give your undertaking to tell the truth. Yes, so we...
Uncle Johnny Lovett, do you solemnly undertake to provide truthful evidence to your Yoorrook Justice Commission during today's Werrick Chorong?
I do, and just to reiterate on that, I'd like to explain that I take that oath to tell the truth on the graves of my mother and father, to whom connected me to this country and to their country and to the customs and traditions that I've learned over the years.
Thank you, Uncle Johnny.
Thank you, Uncle. And the evidence that you give today, including your statement, that is true and correct? You're content with the contents of that statement?
Yes, I am.
Thank you, Uncle. Uncle, can I ask you to start at the beginning and explain your connection, your family connection to country?
Sure. My family is from 1855 to late condemnation later on, and late condemation was established 1867, but prior to that my families were part and parcel of the Gunditjmara country surrounding the southwestern districts. Their existence was after and before the Yoorrook Wars and other massacres in that part of the state, where 60% of the massacres of Victoria occurred. So I have a very strong connection, as does other Gunditjmara people and Bowendick people. I might add the Bowendick people in. My father was Bowendick. My grandfather was Bowendick, sorry. And so it certainly is an area that I'm pretty familiar with and very content and proud to be a Gunditjmara Bowendick man, and as I am of other areas that I've come across in my lifetime of 74 years. So, yes.
For those of us who don't know, could you just explain where the Gunditjmara lands are and then where the Bowendick lands are?
Yes, we are part of the southwestern Victoria, around Portland, Hamilton. I'll name the towns so that people may be more aware of them. South, we go to Portland and along the coast towards Warrnambool. North, we go towards Hamilton. West, we go towards the Glenelg River, and the Bowendick side of me is from the western side of the Grampians to Cape Jaffa in South Australia, down the coast around to Port MacDonald and back up the Glenelg River.
And those lands originally crossed the borders of what is now South Australia?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
How far into South Australia do those lands extend?
The Bowendick land extends right through to Cape Jaffa on the coast.
Thank you. So can we start at the beginning with family? You mentioned your family.
Yes, James Lovett, my great-grandfather, was born in Mancambia. He came across to Lake Mission and married my grandmother. Hannah MacDonald. Hannah MacDonald was part of the Lake Honda area, which of course Lake Honda didn't come till 1867, you know, so when we talk about sort of early 1855s and things like that, it still is relevant that that area is really identified as part and parcel of it all. And we applied for and succeeded in the native title grant in the early part of it, which recognised the encompasses of those areas.
Yes.
So,
And you're familiar with that history and the history of the settlement, white settlement of those areas.
yes.
So could you tell the Commission in broad terms about the original white settlement of those lands around Portland?
Yeah, the Hentish came there around about 1834, and then went out towards Casterton, and Major Mitchell came through that area as well, early parts, and so it was a very early contact of white settlement in those areas, because Port Phillip Bay being the main part of where it was all happening, and then they was pushing into the countries from there and coming down to the south because of the rich pastoral areas that were there, enticed a lot of them to come, and of course where you had people coming through who wanted to make that country their country, there had to be conflicts, and the conflicts certainly did arise to a great extent, where we fought war on the Umarella River for 22 years against white settlement, and continued, the massacres and the murders in those areas just continued and escalated to the point where you think that you know now in today's actual fact that the most massacres that happened in the southwest in Victoria happened in the southwest of Victoria. So it was a very very hostile environment for Aboriginal people, and we didn't step aside and say come into our land because you can have it, because those lands contained our spiritual connection to who we were. And traditionally, custom, law, religion, spiritualism, language, song, dance, they were all part of that country, and those things still live on in our country today, and they'll live on after today.
Yeah. I do want to come back to the topic,
Yep.
but I wanted to invite you to start with a song that you've prepared for the Commission.
Yes.
Would you like to come forward?
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So would you like to introduce the song to us?
Yeah, it's a song that I wrote many years ago, and it's sort of become a bit of a national anthem to the Gunditjmara people, I hope, and it's sang in a lot of places and a lot of festivals and happenings and things associated to that area of the Aboriginal people. So I wrote this song a long, long time ago. And I actually wrote it when I was managing George Wright Hostel here in Gore Street in Fitzroy. And I went home and then I managed Lake Conda. So I'll sing this song for you. Gunditch Jamara people, come back to your land. Gunditch Jamara people, come home and make a stand. Don't let the white man do to us what he did so long ago. Let's stand up and be counted and let our feelings show. When the white man fought each other far across the seas, our fathers went and joined them to keep Australia free. Now the time has come to pass, and our fathers have gone to rest. Oh, Gunditch Jamara people, stand up and do your best. Oh, Gunditch Jamara people, come back to your land. Gunditch Jamara people, come home and make a stand. And don't let the white man do to us what he did so long ago. Let's stand up and be counted and let our feelings show. Come on and stand up and be counted and let our feelings show.
Thank you, Uncle Johnny. Would you like to do another song now, or we'll do one at the finish?
Well, I could do another one now, and then I don't have to come back later on, do I?
Certainly.
I don't have to do an encore.
We might ask for one anyway.
This song I wrote about the stolen generation, and going back to Lake Conda and my area, I can remember about 26 of my family members being taken from Lake Conda. Some of them came home. Some of them didn't know that they had a home to come to. Some of them didn't know they had families to come to. Some came home with no family. And some who passed away and died in other places were brought back. And one of my cousins at the age of 57 that we brought back to be reburied at Lake Conda was still awarded the state of Victoria. So, I wrote this song for all those people. I was a small part of the stolen generation myself. But there was many that was a bigger part of it. Some of them came home. They took away the babies from their mother's breast. Said, come little children, this way of life is best. You can't live your tribal way. This way of life is wrong. We can't let you live and learn your culture or your songs. And the mothers cried, and their fathers cried, and the children were all gone. Today in our communities, some children have come back, knowing deep down in their soul their way of life is black, and their mothers cry, and their fathers cry, and some children have come home. They took away the babies from their mother's breast, said, "Come, little children, this way of life is best. You can't live your tribal way, this way of life is wrong. And we can't let you live and learn your culture and your songs." And their mothers cry, and their fathers cry, and some children have come home. Some children have come home.
Thank you, Uncle John.
Thank you, Uncle. Would you like to return to your seat? Thank you. Thank you, Uncle, for sharing those beautiful words. And I'd like to come back to some of the themes of those songs. Okay. Can I come back to your grandparents, Hannah and James Lovett? They were born in the 1850s.
Yeah, 55, yeah.
So the settlement of Portland, as you said, was around 20 years before their birth.
Yes.
Yeah. And they would have seen the early push by the settlers into those lands.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So can you tell us what you know about how life was for them and their interactions with the settlers?
A grandfather, he was actually born in Mount Gambier from the Bowendick people, and then he came across. And he met up with Granny. So prior to that, Lake Conda was really, when I say Lake Conda, I mean that the area of the southwest where it is today, you know, and I think it's more sort of recognisable by sort of stating that.
Yep.
But prior to that, the war that started on the Umarella in around about the 1834 to 46 or something like that, 44, went on for 20 years. So there was a great number of people who were displaced from their traditional homes and were pushed out by white settlement. Mm. And then of course, as part of not only were we fighting the early settlers, we were also fighting the police that were brought in to settle the unrest between, for a want of a better word, between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. And so we were surrounded by people who really wanted to mete out the worst punishment to us that they could, because we owned the land that they wanted. Mm. And I think, that's a very important thing to remember, that it was such a rich area to us. Has Aboriginal land to Aboriginal people everywhere. I'm not excluding anyone, you know, but it's such a economic situation for those people to be in, and it doesn't matter how hard they did it. At the end of the day, they're still doing all right. Aboriginals aren't.
So, at the time of white settlement, approximately how many people, local people, would be have been living in that area?
I am not too sure, but there was a number of different clans or tribes or clans. Gunditj Yamara consisting of, Dawood Wurrong has the mother tongue, and then Gunditj Yamara being one of the clans, and you had 59 other clans.
How many clans are there left today?
Not a great deal. Probably about 10 to 15, maybe. Yeah.
In terms of the languages that were spoken before white settlement, do you have a sense of how many different languages there were?
Well, there would have been 59 different languages in that area, the dialects. Yeah.
And today, is there only 11 or so?
Well, yeah, there would be very, very few of that language left. And only probably in some parts it may be spoken. And of course, because of the oral tradition that we had, it would be very hard to retrace that and revive that language because of not having a written language ourselves.
Yeah. What is the importance of language to First Nations people?
I think it's a great importance. It's a great importance. It identifies you, it gives you self-esteem and self-pride and connects you to country and things like that. And, I think it's very important. I in my travels have come across people 18 years old and English is their seventh language, in different areas, So that's how important it is to maintain or trying to revive language and all the cultural significance that it brings about.
So with the loss of those families through the interaction with white settlers, there was a loss of the families, the family units, the language, and you just mentioned the culture as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And what impact, just in a general sense, we'll come back to it, but what impact has that had on the people who remain, First Nations people?
I think it's had a very big impact because it's something that people will probably miss up until they die. It's something that hasn't been replaced in their lives. It's part of their lives that's been taken, and it will be forever a gap in their life. Connection to country, connection to song, dance, language, spiritualism, law, religion, and it's gone.
Can I come back to your family?
Mm-hmm.
You've told us about your grandparents, Hannah and James Lovett. And who are your parents?
Herbert and Emma.
Yep.
Herbert Lovett, Herbert Staley Lovett, and Emma Christina.
And how many children were in your family?
Six of us.
And where do you come in the family?
I'm the youngest.
Mm-hmm. Are your brothers and sisters still alive?
Only one sister's alive.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you were born, which was 1947,
Yeah.
where were you living?
We was living at a little place called Sunday Creek, just 4 miles out of Hayward. We lived in the bush there, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that was where Mum took me after she was out of hospital. She took me back there, yeah.
Okay. So by that time, your parents were living in the bush.
Yes.
Where had they lived before?
They lived in Hamilton. They lived up around there, and prior to that too, before they were married, they were still living on Lake Mission. But when they got married, and they got married in 1926, Dad, during his army service and that, he worked different jobs and lived in different places. They lived in Hamilton for a while. And then we went back to the bush and lived there. I don't remember him coming home from the Second World War. I was too young. But after that, they moved to Greenvale, we called it then, Sunday Creek.
Did you have other family around you when you were growing up?
Yeah, I did. I had about 300 metres down the road was Dad's brother, Uncle Freddie, and his kids, and there was 15 of us kids in the two houses, sort of thing, you know, growing up. And yeah, we had a big family, and then we had Joseph's father's father and mother down at Lake Mission, and there were remnants of Aboriginal groups right around the area, sort of thing, over at Dunmore and Tirrandara, and so there was still, you know, a lot of Aboriginal people around, which I would say, compared to today, wasn't very many, but the ones that were around, we sort of all visited each other, and there wasn't too many cars floating around in those days, you know, so you either got a ride with someone or you walked and things like that, and it was pretty, but it wasn't a thing that was done under stress or anything like that. It was done because we wanted to see each other and wanted to be with each other and things like that, you know. So I can remember people coming from Framlingham walking, you know, and visiting us and things like that. And
Just so people know, how far away is Framlingham from
oh,
Hayward?
Goodness. Nearly 2 hours in the car. Yeah, from Hamilton. So people would, they would visit, and I think we've seen more of each other back then than we do now. You know, but that was the connection to being with each other all the time, because we only had each other. You know, we didn't have a lot outside of our own communities. You know.
How was it growing up with that extended family around you?
Oh, great. Absolutely great. Yeah. Great. You know, I treasure the memories of growing up with that family around, you know. And we have a lot of stories. We have some funny stories, some sad stories, and some hard stories, because some of those that I was growing up with became part of the stolen generation. And you know, so they were lost to us for 18 years or so, until, you know, they came back out of the orphanages and things like that. I don't know how you end up in an orphanage when you have parents. I could never ever work that one out. So, but it was certainly great. It was good times. It was hard times, really hard times. My mother carted water from the river 600 metres away with 2 kerosene drum tins with wire handles and a yoke across her shoulders to wash clothes and bathe me, you know. So it wasn't an easy life, but it's all we knew. It was all we knew. So we made the best of it that we could, and but it was hard, very hard.
The uncle and aunt who were close to you, you said about 300 metres away, was that Uncle Freddie and Auntie Mary?
Mary, yeah.
Yeah. And were they like parents to you, basically?
Oh, yeah. Us kids never went without parents, because all our aunties and uncles became our mothers and fathers. We didn't become, you know, we always had parents around us. And our sisters and brothers, they stepped up to the plate. And they become, you know, carers for us and things like that, looked after us as well.
What would you say if a government official had said at the time that you and your family were being neglected as children?
Well, you would have to ask in what respect do they, you know, what's the interpretation of their word of neglect? I would ask them, what do you mean by neglect, you know? What is your interpretation of neglect? Because, I mean, we had love, we had food, not a lot of it, but we hunted. That was part of our traditional lifestyle. So we wasn't doing anything that was new to us. So we were doing things that were old to us. We were doing things that was part of our survival training as Aboriginal people, you know. And if we lived on a river like the Murray or a big river like that, then we'd be fishing and doing all the things that they were doing up in that areas. And so, yeah, I don't know what their interpretation of that would be.
I'll come back to what happened to you. Just in terms of the hunting, were you hunting as children?
Yes. We used to cut our own bundies, what you call bundies, and they were sticks and they were roots of a tree, and we'd shape them. We all had our own, and the mob from the mission come up, and they would hunt with us, and we used to practice with an old pram wheel and throw it up and down the road, and one bloke would stand that end and throw it, one this end, and those in between would practice with the bundies. And we'd go hunting with them, and dogs. We had a couple of dogs, and we went hunting with them, and that's how we caught rabbits. And we became very good at using those bundies, you know. We could hit a rabbit on the run and stun it and grab it, and you know. And so that's the way we hunted. We fished also. We didn't always use, sometimes there was no hooks and no money for hooks. So the old men would fashion a bobbin, what they called a bobbin. It was remember the old butcher string, and you'd get that and you'd loop it, and you would feed the worms on that as a loop, and get a stick and then into the water, and you'd feel the eels sucking on it, and then you'd flip them out like that. So I don't think I've seen a bobbin now being used since I was a kid.
So you mentioned the eels there. What is the significance of the eels to the Lake Condah area and those lands?
Well, they were a food source, very much so a food source, but they was also a medicinal source as well. There was plenty of, today we know that the eel is, of course, omega-3, very, very much a lot of oil in the eels. But also the skin was used as a poultice for aches and pains and things like that. And they were spun and the skin was wrapped around the joints of people to heal them. So yeah, it was medicinal and food.
And was that something that the First Nations people in the area had used for a long time before settlement? Yeah. And we'll talk about the World Heritage listing of those sites, but how did the First Nations people manage the eel harvest in those areas? They
built stone weirs out of the volcano lava flow, and I suppose if you've seen a lava flow from a volcano, it's all different shapes and depths and things like that, and I'm amazed at how the technology that they used, and because everything that they did was by eyesight. You know, there was no spirit levels and things like that, and so they watched the rise and fall of the waters at different times, winter, summer, and spring and things like that. And they built the weirs accordingly. As the water went down, they built the fish traps so that there was always fish there.
Those eel traps have World Heritage recognition now. Do you know roughly how old they are, the dating of those eel traps?
I think they're about 7,000 years old or something like that, yeah. there was something, the stone houses and the fish traps. The stone houses was another area that was built in that area, you know. But I think they were about 3,000 years before the pyramids were built.
Mm.
So they'd been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's only by sort of today's recognition, say they could have been there forever, you know. When we're 60,000 years old, how long is, you know, how long's a piece of string, so to speak? You know, we could have been there forever. Those eel traps could have been there forever.
Yeah. Just coming back to your family and growing up, you share a story about your uncles and your father sitting around talking.
Mm.
Do you want to share that story with us?
Yeah, a lot of the uncles from used to come and they'd be passing through on the way to town, to Hayward, or, you know, and they would come, call in, and then Dad would go and they'd sit at the wood heap and sit there and talk and things like that. Not a lot of conversation, but the company was, you know, seemed to be what it was all about.
Mm.
And these men, of course, were on their way to Hayward or Portland or wherever to sell the fish and the eels that they caught to take money and food back to their families in the bush. So, yeah, there was always... And they didn't seem to say a lot, but they, you know, they would roll the smoke and sit down and have a bit of a conversation and sit there for a while, and when it was time to go, they got up and went.
Mm.
And, yeah, so that was sort of the way I remember them.
Mm.
Yeah.
Were they speaking language?
I never heard them speak language,
Mm.
but remembering too that they had a pretty strict protocol with kids not being around adults too much either, you know. So you were seen to be seen and not to be heard, sort of thing.
Mm.
And you didn't ask too many questions either.
Mm.
Yeah. So I didn't hear my father speak language, and I think, you know, that the loss of language came at about the same time that Lake Conda Mission may have been established by 1867, when they started trying to take away everything that we had and that we used before white settlement, you know, and they punished families by cutting their rations when they learned their children language or when they spoke language.
Mm.
And they'd lock them up in the dormitory down at the mission and things like that, and wouldn't give them the kids back to the families unless they stopped them learning.
So the missions were created to move First Nations people onto those missions,
Yeah.
and removed off the land, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. And were your grandparents moved to the mission?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you said they met there? Yeah. Were they married there on the mission?
Yes. Yeah, they were married on the
Yeah.
mission.
How long did they live there on the mission?
I think grandfather passed away in around about 1939, and Granny Hannah passed away in 1946. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they'd been sort of there most of the time, yeah.
Yeah. What can you tell us about that Lake Conda mission in terms of the way people live there?
I suppose when you're a kid and you see a lot of your relations and you play around and you do all sorts of things, you think everything's wonderful. Because I don't think that you realise how bad times can be until you get older. And so I always thought it was great to go to the mission because I'd see all my mob, you know, and they'd all come up to go to the movies. They'd walk from there into Hayward, stop with us on the night, going back, and So it was always great. So I think, yeah, until we got a little bit older and we started to realise that life was as hard as it was. And I seen the old men, and as a young boy of 10 and 12 and things like that, stripping wattle bark off trees and tied it in bundles with wire and leaving it at the side of the road for one of the contractors to pick up and take to Bothwicks to be tanned and all that sort of thing. And they'd split posts for farmers who wanted to buy the posts from them, you know. So, yeah, and they worked in the quarries that were there. And some Dad ended up sort of going into the areas of sheep, shearing, shearers, cooks and things like that, and working like that, and milling in the milling area. And we sort of, I didn't realise how hard it was until I got a little bit older, and I could see my mother walking with 2 tins of water on her shoulders while my father wasn't there, and I'd be thinking, well, where's he? And he was 50, 60 k's away working on a station. So when he wasn't around, my mother had to do everything. And he'd come home once a fortnight or once a month. So not only was we were missing him for 2 world wars, but we were missing him when he was home. You know?
You went to the local primary school in Haywood.
I did.
Yeah,
Yes.
how was that? What?
It was a little bit different. I was the only Aboriginal there. But I think there's when I sort of think that, you know, that there was a certain thing about kids that they didn't have a natural instinct for racism, you know, and I always grew up with the idea that racism was taught at home, and I think that was a pretty true fact.
So did you experience that at school?
Not a lot at primary, but certainly at secondary.
Yeah, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, look, I was the only Aboriginal too in secondary school.
This is Haywood
for a
Secondary?
while. Yeah, until the other schools in the outlying areas, they were amalgamated, and then they came in. So once again, I had family around me, you know. But not only was the racism there by kids, it was also by the teachers, the pupils, the teachers, you know. I remember one of my cousins, an uncle to Joseph, wanted to be an electrician, and he was told, oh, no, you can't be an electrician because you're Aboriginal. You know, so I don't know what that had to do with anything. So I think there was always that part of the schooling, you know, and I think the worst thing that we see today as adults surviving, the curriculums of the education system were just so terribly wrong in not including Aboriginal history in their curriculums for everyone to learn. It was injustice to white fellas, and it was an injustice to us.
So what did you learn about Australian history when you were at school?
Well, I learned Captain Cook discovered Australia in 1788. But, you know, and that was about it. There was no talk about what is World Heritage today mentioned at all. You know, there was no discussion on some of the great Aboriginal men who walked around the country and got things going, like William Cooper and Sir Doug Nicholls and things like that. And we had some really great men and women who could have stood up anywhere and been counted. But there was no teaching of them in the education system that I grew up, and probably very little of it still today. So, yeah.
Did you enjoy school, secondary school?
Sometimes.
Yeah, what about the other times?
I was too busy fighting the other times.
Right.
Yeah, so sometimes I did, yeah.
So you got into a few fights?
I did actually, and I ended up taking up boxing, and I was about, I don't know, 13 or 12 or something like that. And there was an old trainer in Hamilton who used to come down and pick me up and take me to Hamilton, and I'd stay with him and his family, and there was about 5 different gyms in Hamilton, and we all competed against each other, so I sort of learnt to fight.
So this trainer was Tommy Moore?
Tommy Moore, yeah.
Yeah.
We used to call him Humphrey Bogart.
Well, he looked
Never
like
to his
Humphrey.
face though.
And what you're talking about is tent boxing.
Yeah, and I fought in tents, and to understand a little about the tent boxing, I think people sort of sell it a bit short of really what it was all about, because a lot of times in Aboriginal communities, when tents came through that area, Aboriginal people survived from them coming through, because the men fought for the tents, and they got paid, and the old saying was a round or two for a pound or two, so they earned money and they fed their families. But it wasn't only us that survived, so did some poor white families done the same too as well.
Yeah.
But the tents were very good for us, because outside of showtime there's very little work around. Some people just didn't want to employ Aboriginal people. There wasn't a lot around. You had to travel. No one had vehicles to get to and from.
Mm.
So they become a major part. Today I think there's only one boxing tent left in the world, and it's up in Queensland. It's called Fred Brophy's boxing tent. I fought in that tent in Western Australia when I was 29 years old.
I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask us a photo be brought up, which is an extra eye. But just on that boxing, you started at what age? Your training?
About 12.
Right. And how often were you training with Tommy Moore?
I trained with Tommy a fair bit, and then we moved to Hamilton in 1960, and then I trained. Yeah, I had to train 3 times a week or whatever with him for quite a number of years.
So what we've brought up there is a newspaper clipping that mentions Tommy and his boxing. Have you seen this newspaper clipping?
Yeah, I have, yeah.
So tell us about this.
Well, that sort of backs up what I was saying about some of the gyms that were around at the time. And boxing was pretty popular in the southwest. And it probably was in other places too. I think around Shepparton it was pretty popular. Don House and all that sort of thing. They were all pretty popular up there too as well. But there was five clubs in Hamilton, and there's some good fighters in Hamilton. They were Aboriginals too. My old brother-in-law, Nulla Roston, is mentioned there. And on that night there, they raised money for the school, the Hayward School, and I think they raised £70, which was probably $140. There was a few Aboriginal people there who fought. And Nulla's name's mentioned there. He fought a bloke from Queensland who was a professional fighter, and I think Nulla stopped him in around about the 4th round. And there's one lad mentioned there, Alan Lovett, another cousin of mine, who threw the challenge out to one of the other blokes in the dressing room, and that fight took place. So, yeah, and Ronnie Foster, he's mentioned there. He's the son of Eunice Wright, who, he's the son of Ronnie, Eunice, Monty Foster, who was Mum's brother. Yeah, so there was a few there, and it sort of boxing was a very big sport. I never played football, I didn't play football. A lot of the others played football. I wasn't too interested in football. I liked the training and all that sort of thing, and I definitely got a bit of discipline from Tommy Moore. He was pretty good. You know, he sort of, to all of us, black, white and white, he used to lay down the law. You're not here to learn this to become a thug. You know, so he was pretty good. And, you know.
Did you find that you were treated the same, black and white, by Tommy Moore?
Oh yeah, probably I was treated better than the whites because I used to go and stay with him and his family. You know, so I was probably and when he got a fair age, we done a bit of that. I can't remember what the name of the program used to be on TV, but we all turned up at a surprise celebration for him.
This Is Your Life?
This Is Your Life, yeah. So we done that in Hamilton, and we all came from wherever we were at the time to come home and be at that for him, yeah. So, yeah.
This is for Billy Leach.
Sorry?
The This Is Your Life was done...
No, that was for Tommy Moore.
For Tommy Moore?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Billy Leach I travelled with. I travelled with him as a fighter. But he used to do the Hamilton show regularly every year, and every time they would come into Hamilton, they'd come and knock on our door and say, well, you know, you will come and fight for us. And they had other rides and merry-go-rounds, and so they'd give our kids tickets to go and hop on them while, you know, we fought for them and all. So, yeah, so our kids we wouldn't have had the money to send our kids on those shows and things like that. So, yeah, there was a little bit of that going on. I think it went on in every Aboriginal community in the state and elsewhere as well with the shows. You were all teenagers fighting against each other? Yeah.
And did you look out for each other? And
Yeah, you did. You got a bit of a feeling on your opponent, whether he could fight or whether he couldn't, and you sort of look after him a bit, you know, because you was never there to really do any damage to anyone. You was there just to make a quid, you know. Yeah.
So going back to secondary school, and you were boxing at the time, with some skills, obviously. Were you getting into fights a bit at school?
Yeah, I was at school. I was, but it was mainly sort of on the weekends when we'd go to the movies, you know, and you were fighting with those you went to school with because of racial remarks, you know, during the course of going to see a movie. We'd walk from Sunday Creek to Hayward, was 4 mile, and then the mission mob would come through and they'd walk from there, and so that was another 12 miles for them to walk from there to Hayward. And so then on the way home, the Saturday night, they'd stay with us, and then they'd go home next day. But yeah, so yeah, the racism seemed to sort of creep out when, you know, over the weekend, and because I sort of look back now and I think, well, the football was on the weekends too, you know, on the Saturday, so everyone from everywhere would be at the football, then at the movies, you know, and I think that sort of, maybe the football sort of drew out the worst of them.
So can you give us some examples?
I suppose, you know, my brother played a lot of football, and so did the other Aboriginal cousins and that, and sometimes they would walk from Greenvale, wherever, to go to football training, and
Greenvale to where?
To Hayward.
So that, how far is that? About
4 mile.
Yep.
4 mile. And some of their football mates would drive past them on their way to the football game and drive past them on their way, you know, walking back home. You know, there's a little bit of class distinction there. And with Jackie Lovett, I remember him in 1956. He Coleraine and Hamilton grand final, and Jack Lovett won the game off his boot, and in about the third quarter, they celebrated at the Hayward Hotel, and he stood out in the footpath and they handed him beer through an open window.
So he was best on ground, but he couldn't drink
Yeah,
in the
wasn't
pub.
best enough to get inside to the pub.
And Jackie Lovett's your cousin?
Yeah, he was Uncle Freddie's son.
So that sort of different treatment of the First Nations people,
Yeah,
that was obvious to you at school,
yeah,
yeah,
very obvious, yeah.
at school age, and particularly you were saying on the weekends.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was there anything else about sport, and the footy particularly, that sticks in your memory?
Sorry?
Was there anything else about the football and the treatment of your cousins and others that you remember from those days?
Yeah, there was my other cousin, Billy Lovett, he was Jack's brother, and he was a good footballer. And when they played Portland, he was always a target for racism by the Hogans. They were white people, and Barry and him used to get stuck into it a fair bit. And I think more people come to see them fight rather than play football, you know.
Yeah. Have you seen that that level of racism continue in sport?
I later on, as I got older, and I ended up being a trainer with two football clubs, Bessiebill and Branxholme, and I've seen racism there. Yeah, I've seen fair Aboriginals with blue eyes and blonde hair being called bungs and abos, and, you know. So I don't know how that works.
And how do you deal with that?
Well, they were pretty fiery, some of them boys, and I'd have to run out in the ground and sort of say to them, you know, no, hold on now, you know, you're going to penalise us if you're doing anything wrong in the game, you know, you're going to penalise us, but, you know, when you can get away with it, get away with it.
Oh, responding, you mean? Yeah. Responding to the comments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Uncle, we might take a break shortly, and then after the break, I want to come back to Lake Conda and the mission. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Is that a convenient time?
I believe so.
Yeah.
You ready for a break, Uncle?
yeah, thank you.
All stand, please. Yoorrook Justice Commission is adjourned until 11:15. Thank you. This sitting of the Yoorrook Justice Commission has now resumed.
Thank you, Uncle. Uncle, when you first started giving your evidence, you were talking about the Yoorrook Wars. And I wanted to ask you about that early history of white settlement, the Yoorrook Wars and the fighting, and to ask you about the massacres that you mentioned.
Yeah, the Yoorrook Wars started around about 1834, went through to about 1844 or something like that. Could have been longer. There was a very large number of Aboriginal people killed in those wars. There was other Aboriginals from other areas too come to help fight that war as well. The last sort of resistance that was broken was fought near Mount Eccles, or Mount Eccles, which is called Budgebim, yeah, Budgebim, yeah. And it was fought on the plains there, and they sort of referred to the Aboriginal groups, and their tactics in the Yoorrook War. was a little bit similar to the Vietnam Cong, the way they fought their wars. And if you sort of knew the terrain there, it was pretty hard to ride horses over and things like that. So they would have to get off the horse and go in on foot. But by that time, the Aboriginal people would be back in amongst the stones and got away from them, you know. But there was, I suppose, the biggest thing that helped the white settlers was they had weapons. They had weapons, you know, and the mob only had spears and boomerangs and things like that, and good hard will to fight to determine they still are the people that belong to that country.
Mm.
And I think that, and I've often said it of late, that we probably had the best weapon of all times, and we never ever used it,
What was that?
and that was fire. That was fire. And we were the masters of fire.
Mm.
So the excuse that I see that we never used it was we were a passive mob. You know, otherwise we could have really, really caused a lot of damage to country, to people, and just burn them out.
Mm.
You know, we didn't do that. And yet we knew how to control and use fire. So to me that says, you know, that there was a certain sense of, you know, let's not do that, and let's try and get through this the best way we can. But by them sort of still trying to maintain and hold on to country and things like that, it was very hard, because then I think Foster Fines was involved, and Dania through the native police corps and things like that, and there was so much stacked against the people, and plus you had the settlers as well, who
So
was causing havoc. You know.
So just paint a picture for us of what was happening with the settlers and the Gunditjmara people and their fighting. What were the triggers for the skirmishes and exchanges?
Look, there was when you sort of have a look at through the history of some of the historians that have written, like Severite and Robson and things like that, and some of the documents there, that, you know, there was a number of reasons why skirmishes started. Sometimes it was the sexual assault on Aboriginal women, and being captured in shepherds' huts and things like that. And of course, the fight for land was very, very strong, because that land held so much culture, you know. And as I said, you know, we didn't walk away and just say, "Here, come and get it, it's yours." We wanted to defend it because it was ours for such a long time and held everything that we believed in. You know, it was why we survived for so long. And then to have white settlement come along, disregard all the respect that for Aboriginal culture that there was, because they knew very little, if anything, or probably absolutely knew nothing about Aboriginal culture at all. And so to them we were just a nuisance, and in their way of them grabbing land and turning it into, you know, an economic base for themselves. And yeah, so, you know, and then you had the warriors, Cocknose and Jupiter and people like that, you know, who were the war leaders at the time, and they were being hunted, they were being blamed, and you know, and I often look at the figures that have been quoted in some of the parts of the history where a group of Aboriginals had driven off 1,000 sheep. Well, Aboriginals never even seen sheep before, and if you've ever driven sheep, you know that it's one hell of a hard job. So all of a sudden you've got Aboriginals being experts at driving off 1,000 sheep.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen.
So you're saying that story about Aboriginals stealing 1,000 sheep
Yeah,
is suspect?
very, very much so.
Yeah.
Very, very much so.
Yeah.
And bullocks, and I think the first bullock that came into the country, of our country, the mob ran away from it because they didn't know what it was.
Mm.
And they seen the two horns and thought they were two tomahawks sticking out of his head. And when he bellowed, they thought he was a devil of some type, and they ran away from him.
Mm.
So can you imagine them driving cattle? You know, so they were frightened enough to one bull, let alone drive a herd of cattle and 1,000 sheep. So, you know, everything was sort of, that information was sort of put as part of, by the settlers, as getting more compensation from whoever was running the show for them, you know, and things like that. I think that's the way it was.
Mm.
And, you know, some of the big stations in the early time around that area, they were, before the missions were built, the Aboriginal Protection Board was already in place. So they were getting rations and flour and clothing and all that to feed Aboriginal people in their areas. And some of the biggest holdings in the southwest were receiving that as funding to deal out to the Aboriginal people, you know, to distribute, you know. And there's always a question in mind, what did they ever do? What did they ever do?
Mm.
You know, I don't believe that they actually done what they were supposed to do.
This is in return for the land?
In return for the land, yeah.
Yeah. One of the early massacres was at a place called Convincing Ground.
Down the coast.
Yeah, and we know there was a history of the whalers and sealers operating along the coast there out of Portland. So can you tell us about that Convincing Ground massacre?
Yeah, and the story goes that the whale had beached itself, and I think part of the Mount Clay mob in Hamilton, just out of Hayward, they were part of that tribes that went down there to feast off the carcass, and the whalers, of course, they were there too, and so they actually massacred quite a number of Aboriginal people there, and hence the Convincing Ground. And I think, you know, when you hear the word Convincing Ground, I can imagine in my mind them saying, we will convince these people not to come back here again. You know, and that's the sort of things that they were doing, you know. And they became a secrecy within themselves, these people who caused the massacres, because they never spoke outside of the circle that was part of the people who were doing the massacres. And they were sworn to secrecy by each other. And it got to that point that your life was in danger if you spoke about it to anyone else, because you break the code of the group, you know. So I think that went on right through the massacres of everywhere in Victoria, where there were big massacres, because one person doesn't massacre that many people. There has to be others. And where there's others, I don't know whether you can keep a secret amongst 10 or 12 or whatever people. So someone will say something somewhere and refers to something. So, you know, I think all of it was orchestrated, all the massacres were orchestrated and planned, and opportunities came when Aboriginals were having corroborees in certain areas, and then they, when they were known to be in the area, the local settlers informed each other, and they just rode around and just shot them. Quanongatong Reservoir is a very big massacre ground in Hamilton, around Hamilton, out that way, Coleraine. What annoys me today is that White Street in Coleraine is still there as the main street of Coleraine, and they were the perpetrators of the whole massacre.
Yeah. So
And,
there's a street in Coleraine named after the Whites.
After Whites.
Yeah.
And one of them actually went to Tasmania after that massacre and became Premier of Tasmania.
Mm.
You know, so, you know, there's sometimes you drive around and you have a look, and the signs are in the country. Just out of Horsham, there's a sign saying Rifle Butt Road. You know, so all you need to do is sort of have a think now. Why would you call that not Rifle Butt Road?
Mm.
You know, the most important part of a rifle is a barrel, isn't it?
Mm.
So that's, you know, they were actually shooting them and clubbing them to death with rifle butts and things like that, you know.
Mm.
So there's stories, I think, you know, that, and there's indications of what went on when you sort of get to know country and you get around country and you look at country and you see country, you know, and Aboriginal people feel country, you know. I've been in some parts of the country where I haven't felt very comfortable at all, and I'm not really a frightened person about anything. But I felt that I shouldn't be here in this part of the country, and I've left.
Mm.
So, you know, sometimes the country will tell you what's happening as an Aboriginal person. And I think, you know, if you've got a bit of a sense of things going on around you, and not only pertaining to Aboriginal people either, you pick up these vibes and things like that, you know.
Mm.
And I've had white people say to me, they've been in some areas where, wow, I've got a terrible feeling there when I was there, you know. I was talking, I don't know, welcome to country, just off the track a little bit, last Saturday to the Red Gum Festival at Cavendish. And a woman came up to me and she said, do you know the chimney pots in the Grampians? And I said, I do. She said, we recently just bought them. She said, but I feel very uncomfortable there. One of the biggest massacre sites in the area.
Mm.
You know, so that's what I'm saying, you know, people, and so she's asked me to go out there and have a look around and sort of thing, have a talk to her and her husband and, yeah, about country. But so, you know, you don't have to be super cluey to work things out sometimes.
Mm.
You just have a feeling, and sometimes, you know, what you get as a feeling is pretty more spot on than what you think.
You mentioned the reservoir.
Yeah, Quanongatong, yeah.
That site was revealed after a flood.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
So tell us about that.
Yeah, there was a big flood in 1946, and it was a really big flood. And when you look at that area there and you realise that the mountain range and the hilly ranges of that area, yet that flood went from there right through to Macarthur and the other side. So it's just, it's unreal to sort of sit down and look at that place today and think how that flood ever got through some of the barriers, you know, of the hills and things like that.
Mm.
But that was the Bowendick mob that got massacred there. They were massacred, and the 46 flood uncovered a lot of their skeletons.
Mm.
Most of the massacres that happened in there's Murderers Flats. There's three big areas pretty close together: Quanongatong, Murderers Flat, and there's another one just not far from sort of where Henty sort of ended up being. And what what they did was, there was a lot of poisoning that went on. They put, poison in the flour and things like that, even to the point of putting plaster of Paris in the flour. And
So just to explain, the flour was handed out as rations.
yeah, handed out as rations, yeah.
And they were being poisoned.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and these are parts of the rations that I was talking about that the government was giving them to give to people.
Mm.
And so they'd lace it with strychnine and things like that.
Mm.
And then when they died, they either chucked them in the river or just burnt them,
Mm.
and to get rid of the evidence. So that was part of the uncovering of the bones when the floods came through for the Konongatong massacre, Fighting Hills it was called.
Yeah.
The Fighting Hills, yeah.
So the reservoir and Murderer's Flat and the Convincing Ground, places like that, some of those now have markers or memorials to describe what happened there?
Well, I'm not too sure about that, but, they certainly need them. They certainly do need them. I mean, you drive around Victoria and you see Major Mitchell statues all over the place, and you see Henty Highway and things like that, so, and you see White Street in Coleraine, but you don't see a memorial for too many massacre sites.
Mm.
Yeah. So I think, it's a long time coming, and it needs to be there out there. If we're around about for telling the truth and for being truthful for how things happened and how things are, then I think there needs to be the respect of the truth that needs to be shown, for the truth being told.
Mm.
And yet you still have people who are in the area who the perpetrators of the crimes committed were their families. And I think between the guilt that they're carrying and the ignorance that they're carrying, they've got no hope of realising anything.
Mm.
And it causes a little bit of a racist attitude towards Aboriginal people.
Mm.
And I think, that's a very, very big thing, I think,
Mm.
that's happened,
So what would you like to see happen in terms of that recording in place of what happened in those places?
Look, I think the time is coming where white people are now saying as well. I know that there's people in Hamilton and people in Coleraine who have said to me, yes, we would like to see you change the name of White Street, So I think there's that sort of thing around, and people are a little bit more educated than the one that walked up to me when native title was on and said, if you come onto my father's property, he'd shoot you. So I think there's a little bit more understanding by people who are not quite so ignorant and so lost in their guilt because their families' forefathers were the perpetrators.
Mm.
And I mean, they can't be blamed for that today. But understand it happened, accept it happened, and let's do something about it.
Mm.
And if you want a better conscience than what you've got today, then do something about it.
Yeah. So the missions at Framlingham and Lake Condah were set up for what purpose?
I believe that they were set up simply to get people off land, so that that pastoral availability could happen and people could claim more land. The government was in control of handing out leases and things like that, and I think the sooner they got the people off the land, they could get on with benefiting from it, if you sort of think about Lake Condah and where they bought them from and put them on there, and then all of a sudden you've got people from very distant areas becoming people of Lake Conda and things like that who would really, you know, physically not that associated to that area.
Mhm.
You know, so it's thrown a lot of confusion into Aboriginal people as well. You know, some people may think because you're born on country, that's who you are. Well, that's not the point. That's not how it works with Aboriginal people. Because you just being born on country doesn't give you a right and connection to country. You know, and I think in a lot of times people get confused with that too. You know, it's all right to say, oh yeah, but I was born there. Well, it doesn't matter where you were born. It's who you are and where you come from, where your connections are.
So that movement of people, has that caused disharmony and disagreements amongst people?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And a hell of a lot of confusion. I think a hell of a lot of confusion as to where do you belong or where do I belong. You know, people have sort of hung their hat on the country they're in to find out, well, I really don't come from that country anyhow, you know. But I was born there. But as I said, you know, being born on country doesn't give me the right. Being in Victoria may give you the right to be a Victorian under white law, but it doesn't. Being born on, you know, Aboriginal country from another country, it doesn't give you the right to be that of that country.
The Lake Conda mission was closed in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
So what happened to your family at that time?
Well, I reckon it was about there was it just wasn't closed. There was a preconceived idea that Lake Conda would become grounds for soldier settlement.
Right.
I think that was a pretty big. That was the issue. That was the plan.
So these are soldiers returning from the war.
Sorry?
These were soldiers returning from the war,
yeah.
who were to be given grants of land, parcels of land.
Yeah.
And are you saying that Lake Conda was carved up for that purpose?
I believe so. I absolutely believe so.
Now tell me about your family war service.
My father was my first father's brother, Alf Lovett, went to war in 1915 as a light horse, and others followed. Dad and three of his other brothers. Dad joined up in 1917, and Uncle Freddie, Uncle Sam, Uncle Edward, and Uncle Leonard.
Alfred and Leonard?
Yeah.
And Alfred too?
No, Alfred was in the First World War. He was
Right.
1915.
Okay.
And then the last one, Samuel, he joined up, and he was in the Second World War.
Okay.
He was too young to go to the first. Yeah.
So a large number of the boys from the families enlisted.
Yeah.
And were they able to enlist easily, or was there some racism in the enlistment processes?
When you sort of look down the track and there's, you know, there's it's not only what you see and hear, there's also records that sort of leap out at you. And for instance, there was 11 men from Lake Conda Mission marched up to Grey Street in 1916, demanding to be in the army. Some of them were taken in on the day, and they went to Puckapunyal or wherever, to the army, and after a week being there they were discharged as being unfit, yet they were the top sportsmen of the area. So how do you go from being so fit to being unfit in a week? You know, and it was I think it was a question of being too black rather than being unfit.
Yeah.
And you know, there was a bit of a document, I think, that said, and it might have included one of the other uncles of mine, that said, too black for the light horse. Too black for the light horse.
Yeah.
You know. And my father and three brothers, the only four men in the whole of the British Empire to serve in 2 world wars, walked into a little pub in Lake Condo, couldn't get a beer in full uniform. You know? So everything's there, I think, if you look at it, and it's been going on for so long, and it's great today to be able to sort of reflect on a lot of things in hope that what we're doing today becomes something very, very solid and supportive and a future ongoing thing for Aboriginal people wherever they are.
I just want to bring up a photo of your father and brothers who served in the war. Just while that's coming up, you also had the next generation served as well,
Yeah,
including some female family members. Yeah.
that's my dad.
So that's your dad in his uniform,
That's my dad in uniform, yeah.
and we might get the next one up. So this is some soldiers lined up on the wharf, going off to service. And could we just zoom in on the right, if it's possible? Might be a bit hard moving around the screen, but there we go. So there's a face on the right there.
Yeah, I see him in the middle there. I think that's Uncle Freddie, I'm not too sure.
In there amongst all those soldiers.
Yeah, waiting the board, yeah.
Yep. And pull up the next photo.
That's Uncle Alf.
So, sorry, who's that?
That's Uncle Alf.
Yeah.
Lovett.
And who's he with there?
That's his wife, Sarah Spring.
Yep.
And that little boy would either be Leo or young Alfred.
Okay. And then the last one in this
And
series.
there's 2 boys there.
Yep. Last one in this series. Who's that? Is that Leonard?
Yeah, I think it's Uncle Leonard.
Yeah.
Just getting back to Uncle Alf, he passed away. He ended up living with us before he passed away,
Mm-hmm.
and so and he was he I don't know where the family was, but he ended up living with us.
So if we can go back to that first photo, please, of your father.
Yep.
How old was he when he enlisted?
He was 19.
Yep. And so 19 years old, did he need permission of anybody to sign
yes,
up?
he did. He needed he needed permission, yeah,
From,
from his parents.
okay. And what was the policy at the time in terms of who could serve?
The policy was that Aboriginals couldn't enlist unless they had some percentage of white blood.
Mm.
Yeah. So I don't know how much percentage you can see there, but he certainly looks a bit like me.
Of the 11 men who said marched up to Hamilton to enlist from the Lake Conda mission, how many of those would have had some white blood in them and that appearance of being more white?
Probably most of them, or I would say nearly all of them, would
Yeah.
look like my father.
Okay. If we could just bring up the recruiting office record. I'm not sure if you can read that, Uncle Johnny, but it reads, this recruit has 2 other brothers with the AIF and his parents are not pure bleeded blacks.
Yeah.
So that was the language that was used at the time?
That was the language that was used at the time, yeah.
And the statement, white people on both parents' sides? Yeah. So this is a recruiting officer letter in relation to someone's application to enlist?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in grandfather's case, in dad's case, grandfather's father was a Scotsman.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the only wide percentage that I can sort of relate to in a true and proper sense in my family's history.
And in terms of your father's service, where did he end up? Was he...
He ended up on the Western Front. He was a machine gunner on the Western Front. Yeah, he joined up with the 5th Battalion and he ended up with the 15th Machine Gun Battalion, and they stopped the last German push on the Western Front from the Germans breaking through. Yeah.
So how would you compare his life on the Western Front with what he'd known before?
Pretty horrific. It'd be amazing, really, because, I mean, he didn't even know what a motor car was at the age of 15. He'd run and hid in the bush because he heard one coming. And then 4 years later, he's getting permission from his parents to go to the war. And then about 7 months later, he's behind a machine gun and seen ships and planes and things that he'd never ever imagined in his life. You know, and the gun that he was operating was one of the most sophisticated guns in the history of the First World War. So his lifespan was probably around about 7 seconds. You know, so yeah, it's mind-boggling for me to even think about, really.
He ended up on the Hindenburg line?
Yeah, he ended up on the Hindenburg line.
And so those who don't know, that was a last push by the Germans?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to break through and they stopped them. I just have no idea. And you know, when I think of later on too, and he lived to see Armstrong walk on the moon, you know, and that sort of thing, you know. He'd seen some things as a man, you know, from coming off Lake Conda.
And when he came home, just in terms of your uncle, they were light horsemen?
They were light horsemen, yeah.
And where did they serve?
They served in all the major theatres of Gallipoli. Yeah. Yeah, they were right under pressure too. You know. Yeah.
Then your father signed up again, World War II.
Yeah.
What did he serve in that?
In the catering forces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Uncle Freddie and Uncle Leo and Uncle Leonard, and so they become the only 4 men in the whole of the British Empire to serve in 2 world wars, black or white. In the that was spoken about by Nigel Smart, who was a curator of the War Museum in London.
When they came home, what sort of welcome did they have?
You would like to think that they would have had a really, really great welcome. I suppose the welcome ended when they came back and there was no Lake Conda, so to speak, you know.
I just missed what you said. There was no Lake Conda.
Yeah.
Yeah. What had happened?
well, Lake Conner was cut up into soldier settlement blocks,
Mm.
and 5 blocks were put up for soldier settlement blocks. So Lake Conner at the time was 2,043 acres, I think, and if you look at today's present land value in Hamilton, you can't buy an acre of land under $12,000 an acre.
Mm. So there were blocks carved out for those returning soldiers.
Yeah,
Were your family given blocks?
no, nothing.
What happened?
I know my dad applied and he never got a response. And I see other letters that I've had during my little search here and there, and some of them from the land manager at the time, who said, when questioned by the Soldiers and Sailors League in Portland about why Lake Conner wasn't given to Aboriginal people as soldier settlement, the reply by the Land Minister at that time was, Aboriginal servicemen can apply, however, we don't consider allocating land to one type of people. So don't give it to the blacks, we'll give it all to the whites. And that's what they did.
Mm.
Yeah.
In terms of a war pension, were they given a war pension?
Look, I truly don't know. I truly don't know. I've still sort of got my lawyers having a look to see what we can find. I don't even know whether my mother got a widow's pension. I think she was denied. Actually, yes, she was denied on the grounds that Dad never died of any injuries caused from the war when he passed away. Yeah.
They didn't give your father and your uncle's land.
No.
The other soldiers had it. Was there a time when they leased out the Lake Conner land for other uses, like grazing?
Oh, they did. They did. They let out Lake Conner Mission in 1900. About the time they were closing it down, and it was leased by the government to people in the Northern Territory who's had stock brought down to Lake Conner Mission from up there, would you believe? About 80 horses were leased to put on Lake Conner Mission. They couldn't give it to their Aboriginal people, but they could lease it out to someone to feed horses.
I think we have a copy of the letter your father wrote, so we might bring that up. So can you read that, Uncle Johnny, or would you
Okay.
like me to read that to you?
I can.
Yeah. So he's looking for information,
Yeah.
and regarding the cutting up of Lake Conner Mission Station into blocks for Aboriginal servicemen. If same was being done, I'd like to make application for a block.
Yeah.
Awaiting your early reply. Still waiting.
Yeah.
And I think you said he'd never got a reply to that letter.
No.
In total, there are something like 37,000 soldiers
Yeah.
returned that were given settlement blocks, and none for your father or uncles.
Yeah.
Did your father enjoy being a soldier? Enjoy might be the wrong word. Was he proud of being a soldier?
Yeah, I think he was very proud of being a soldier. He never talked too much about some of the stuff, but when he worked at Gazette Station, I was doing a gig in Horsham, and there was an old lady there. And she was about 90, And she said to me, do you know Herbert Lovett? And I said, I do. I said, he's my father. He was my father. So she said, my son worked with him on Gazette Station. And I said, really? He said, yes. So I said, oh, I'd like to see him, you know. So she arranged for me and him to meet. And he was about the same age as me.
Mm.
So we were sitting down talking. And he said, you know, John, he said, your dad would sometimes sort of wander off in his mind. He said, and one day, he said, we were working and he said, they were falling and I was shooting, they were falling and I was shooting. And he said, and then he sort of snapped out of it and got back to work and he said, you know, he said, I think he was talking about the war. So he said to me, one day he said to me, because Dad used to eat the blue crane. He loved blue crane and he said, I've run out of blue crane. He said, I've got to get some more. So this young fella said to him, oh, there's a gun in the back of the ute, Herb. And Dad said, no. He said, I don't like guns.
Mm.
And he said to this young bloke, I've got a board and a long handle shovel. And the young fella looked at him and said, a board and a long handle shovel? He said, yeah. He said, I'll get my blue crane with that. And he said to him, how? He said, come with me. He said, so I went with him. He dug a drain from the dam and he had a pocket full of wheat and he put the wheat in the trench that he dug and he put the board over the top. And the blue crane would come and go into that drain and eat that eat that wheat. And they couldn't turn around or fly out. And he said to this young fella, well, the best time to eat blue crane, he said, is after a full moon. And the young fella said, I wonder what's coming now. He said, why is that, Herb? He said, because the blue crane eats the yabbies and it goes right through their meat. And that's the best time to eat it. So he had some stories of Dad. But those stories that he was telling him should have been telling me on the soldier settlement block that he had.
There was some feeling amongst some of the returned soldiers about missing out on land around Lake Condah.
Yeah.
Can we bring up the next exhibit, which is an extract from the Argus, an exuary? Might be having an issue with the technology. Just while that's being brought up, Uncle, if you look at the back of the folder, there's some tabs.
Sorry?
And one has in your folder, there's some tabs. Do you see one that says Annexure E?
Yep.
Yeah, just turn to that and you'll see a newspaper article.
Oh, yeah,
We'll
okay.
bring that up. And perhaps while we're waiting for that to come up, you could just read out that heading in the first paragraph there.
You want me to read that?
If you
sorry.
wouldn't mind, yep.
Yeah. Hamilton Tuesday. Aborigines were angry that land around Condah had been given to soldier settlers without their having a chance to get it, Pastor R.W. Saunders of Hamilton Church of Christ said last night. Returned men among the Aboriginals felt deep resentment that their ancestral land should have been given to others. He said, for a great many years, land in the vicinity of Conda has been a mission station and reserved for Aborigines. Last year, the Public Works Department called for lenders for removal of the historical old church, a mission church at Conda.
Yeah. So the Public Works Department was looking to remove the old church from the mission, and they were basically dismantling it. This is August 1956. 1956. Was your father also resentful?
He didn't speak to me of being resentful, and you know, and I mean, you would have to, well, understand, I guess, that our elders at that time were pretty much as I said, they'd sit around the wood heap, but you wouldn't be there listening, you know. So, you know, they may have spoken about it between themselves and things like that, but I'm sure, when I look back on it, I'm sure that there would be some form of resentment, because when he would go to work at Gazette, he would walk past the Lake Conda Mission and things like that, you know, and go past the areas where these 5 holdings were, the 5 blocks were. So, you know, to come from 2 World Wars and walk past that on your way to work, and because you didn't drive a car, sometimes you'd ride a push bike, and yeah, you'd have to have some thoughts about it, I reckon.
These are the blocks given to others.
Yeah.
And we might bring up your Uncle Samuel's letter next, which is, he wrote in 1947 requesting to rent 1 acre of land. Might be 2 acres.
Yeah, 2 acres.
Yep. That's great. So he's writing to the Aboriginal Board, the Secretary of the Aboriginal Board, in 1947. Would it be possible to rent 2 acres of land for agricultural purpose in the Lake Conda Mission Reserve? So they were writing and asking for access to that land. Yeah. And he got a reply, which we might bring up next. The Secretary of the Returned Sailors, Soldiers and Airmen's Imperial League, as it was then called. Have you got that letter turned up in front of you?
I have.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, he says, the branch at its September meeting passed a motion that the proper quarters be approached with a view of trying to have the Conda Mission station cut up and given to the Aboriginal and half-caste returned servicemen, with a view of settling them under a scheme similar to that of the soldier settlement plans. You see that?
Yes.
Gratefully appreciate it if you'd give our motion support. So the League were writing to the Minister of Lands asking for support that happen. Can I just pause there? Were the Returned Servicemen's League in those days, were they supportive of the returned Aboriginal soldiers?
Yeah, very much, I think. Yeah, I think they were very much supportive of it.
And the Secretary of the sub-branch asked for support of the motion that the station be cut up and given to Aboriginal and, as they called them, half-caste returned servicemen, so they could settle down and reap the benefits due to them from a grateful country. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And he got a reply, which is the next exhibit in your bundle, number H. Bringing that up with further reference to your letter of the 3rd instant relative to a resolution passed by your sub-branch urging that the Condamine station site be subdivided and allotted to Aboriginal and half-caste ex-servicemen, I desire to state that I have investigated this matter, and in the near future the government will consider the advisability of revoking the reservation of the site in question so that the land may be used for soldier settlement purposes. Pointed out, however, it would be very difficult to set this area apart for allotment to one type of ex-serviceman only. But if the land is made available, applications received from eligible Aborigines and half-castes would be considered and dealt with on their merits. So that's the reply, and did it ever go anywhere?
No.
And was your father or your uncle's service ever recognised by a grant of land?
No.
After your father came back from World War II, was he given a piece of land by another society?
Yeah, the Hamilton Uplift Society, yeah.
So I'm sorry, Uncle Johnny, I missed that. Who gave him a piece of land?
The Hamilton Uplift Society.
Yeah, and who were they?
They were a church organisation, I think, in Hamilton.
Okay. Where was that piece of land?
Just outside of Hayward.
Yeah. This is Sunday Creek?
Sunday Creek, yeah.
Yep. And how, did he get a house onto that block?
He actually dragged a house up from Lake Conda with the horses through the bush and rebuilt it there. But before he rebuilt it, he had to go and get extra supervision from the local policeman
What was that?
to help him build a house.
Right. But why did he need supervision?
That was, I don't know, that was part of the protection board, I suppose. You know, they put all these people together, and police were very much involved in the Aboriginal Protection Board, and of course it was implemented by the governor of the day, of the state of the day. Yeah.
You mentioned the work at Gazette Station. Was he doing just that work or other work around the place after his return from service?
Oh, look, I remember him splitting posts and doing black wattle, stripping black wattle and things like that, and working up the crusher.
Mm.
Yeah, so he was always sort of doing something.
Where was he living when he was working on Gazette Station?
He was living on at Gazette.
Yeah.
He was head stockman out there, and he had about four other blokes working with him. They were white fellas from Penshurst, and Penshurst to Gazette was about 7 k's or about 7 miles. So they all lived in town, and he was the only one on the station.
So what was his accommodation on the station like?
It was like a tin humpy. Yeah, he had 16 dogs, and they all lived in tin kennels, and his house wasn't much bigger than their kennels. Well, much better, I should say, than the kennels. No service, no electricity, no water connected, nothing.
Did you spend some time out there with him?
I did, yeah. I used to go out there sometimes and muster cattle with him and things like that. And if I wanted the bath, he'd have to draw water from the pump and carry it inside and put it on an open fire and a kerosene drum tin, and then I'd have a bath, you know.
And just so we understand the difference, the landholder at Gazette Station, where was he living?
He was living in a 23-bedroom mansion with 9 chimneys. He had one person there who was his housekeeper. She lived in one room off the kitchen, he lived in the other. So that meant all the other bedrooms were never been used. He went to, it's the biggest story of all times around Penshurst and Hamilton, where he went to Melbourne to buy a Bentley. And he used to always, I remember him still, he used to walk around with a coat with the patches on the elbows, overalls and gumboots, and an old hat. his name was John Cross, never married. And he went to Melbourne to buy a Bentley, and when he walked into the Bentley dealers, they looked at him and said, "Oh no, you know, we haven't got any Bentleys here to sell." So he went to a Rolls-Royce dealership and bought a Silver Ghost Rolls-Royce. And that winter, when lambing season was on, he was driving around the paddocks in that Rolls-Royce, putting lambs in the back of that car. And my father was living in a tin hut.
Your father came back to live with you after that job?
Yeah, he came. He finished in around about 62, I reckon, and he was living with us in Hamilton before he passed away in 76.
What was the house like in Hamilton when he came back to live with you?
Absolutely terrible. We lived next to a skin store. Summertime you couldn't sleep because of the stench. And I done a little bit of a article with the Hamilton Spectator, and I was going to look for it, and I didn't. I'm sorry, but we ended up getting another house, and because it was about how do you treat a Two World War veteran like this, you know. It was a condemned house we were living in, yeah. So anyhow, yeah, they got a house in 2 College Street, Hamilton. That's where he passed away, in Hamilton Hospital there.
When your father passed, tell us about his funeral.
It was, yeah, there was a lot of people there, and there was a lot of non-Aboriginal people there as well. And you sort of, on the day, you would have thought, well, maybe you wouldn't think that it was an Aboriginal funeral sort of thing, because his coffin was draped with the Australian flag, and things, the last place was being played, and I think when I look at it today, it was a little bit of a fast, you know, that he'd be buried that way. And yeah, and yet there was nothing for him, you know. When he came back, he was back to being black, and so was every other Aboriginal return soldier. And man, woman, anyone who was eligible for whatever everyone else was getting, got nothing, you know, except a very small few.
And of course, he died before he was made a citizen.
Yeah. So, which sort of probably leads to the question is of how does he get into the Australian Army if he's not an Australian citizen? You know, how do anyone get into, if they're not born, if they're born before 1948? You know?
His service was recognised in a number of ways. So he was added, along with his brothers, to the Indigenous honour roll.
Yep.
And there was a building or a tower named after him.
Lovett's Tower in Canberra.
Yeah, so tell us about the tower and turning up for the launch of
that was opened by Sir William Dean. And in my struggle to try and fight for what I believed that they owed my father, I was getting on to the Veterans Affair at a state, Commonwealth level, and I met with Warren Snowden a couple of times, and then they sort of said, "Oh no, we're not responsible for it. This is the state of Victoria that's responsible for it," and all sort of give me the run around. And so I said, "Okay, I'm coming up to tear the name Lovett off Lovett's Tower in Canberra." So I went from Hayward. I went up there and by myself, and I'd have conversation with SBS, which was SBS then, and the year after it became NITV. So they said, "Oh well, Uncle, we'll meet you there and do a segment on it." You know. So I said, "Okay." So they were setting. When I walked around the corner, they were setting up, and also there was security there. And the security said, "Mr. Lovett," and I said, "Yes." They said, "How many of you are there?" I said, "There's only me." They thought there was a big mob of us going up there, you know, but it was only me. So the security guy said to me, he said, "Look, do you mind if I watch this?" And I said, "No, you do it, you know." So at the time, Lovett's Tower was occupied by Veteran Affairs, you know, and he went in and he told them that one of the sons of the Lovett brothers was out there, and if they'd like to come out and meet him, they could, and so they did, you know. But yeah, it's a bit of a story in that.
So they named the tower after your father and the
And
family.
put Veteran Affairs in it. Yeah.
And have you ever had any resolution or closure of the land
No.
claims?
No, not at this time.
Mm.
Not at this moment. Not at this point in time. But I haven't stopped. It's an ongoing issue.
What would you like to see?
I'd like to see my father be repatriated for what he did. I'd like them to recognise what he did. I want them to recognise every Aboriginal that ever put on a uniform for this country, that went to 2 world wars, the first and second, recognised for what they did. And, you know, I think that it's long and well and truly overdue. And it needs to be addressed, and it needs to be done before I die.
Mm. Have you done some sums to work out what you think that claim is worth?
I have. Oh, not recently. I haven't. Not at $12,000 an acre. But I certainly did when it was worth about 5 or something. And I put a bill into Mr. Snowden, and the bill was $5,386.
Mm-hmm.
And he, being Mr. Snowden, said to me, "How did you arrive at this figure?" And me, being me, said to him, with an accountant and a mathematician, with the price of land, wages, cost of stock, and all that.
Mm.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And where did it go after that?
It hasn't gone anywhere much.
Mm.
It hasn't gone anywhere much, but I haven't finished the fight either. Yeah. I've still got a few things happening in my life.
As well as the honour roll and the naming of the building, the RSL has displayed some photos,
Have
displayed photographs and of your dad and uncles.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they've invited you to speak there, down at Port Augusta.
Oh, yes, 2017 was the 100th year celebration of Anzac.
Mm.
And I was there in Port Augusta at the dawn service, and me and my partner, and also there were some Aboriginal people there, 4 men and a woman, an old lady. And when they was laying wreaths at the shrine, the old lady walked up to a rose bush and she picked one rose. And she walked down to the shrine and put it at the shrine. And walked back up to where she was sitting with the other 4 people. And the mayor came up to me and he said, "Oh, John," he said, "I'd like to talk to you." And I said, "No, you come with me and we'll talk to these people first, you know." So we went up and I introduced him to that old lady and the other 4 people. It was such a symbol of hope, you know.
Mm.
And the RSL asked me to speak at Port Augusta RSL Club the most second most racist town in Australia. And there was a black fella standing up there talking on the celebration of Anzac 100th year. And everyone knew the Lovett family. There was one bloke, I never said this before, there was one bloke and it was on a TV show and there was one bloke in Port Augusta, he had long hair, tattoos all over him, shorts and a singlet. And I was in the street talking to an old man and he's standing there and he's just staring at me. And I'm thinking, oh, here we go, you know. So he walks over and he puts his head on my shoulder like that. And he said, good show on TV last night, mate. And walked off. Yeah, so he's seen the story on TV. I thought he was going to come over and be a smarty, you know. But no, he really was, yeah. So, yeah, so, you know, I've sort of pushed for a long time. And 2007 I had a triple bypass. I was given 12 hours to live. 2017 I had half a lung taken out with cancer. But I'm still up for another fight. Yeah, I'm still up for another fight.
We might take a break there for lunch.
Yep, lovely.
And we'll come back at 2 o'clock.
No worries.
Is that convenient?
Thank you.
All stand. The Yoorrook Justice Commission is adjourned until 2 p.m. Thank you. Silence, please. The sitting of the Yoorrook Justice Commission has now resumed.
Just a reminder for people to turn their phones on silent and the notifications off if we can. Uncle Johnny, before we start, I should just tell you that Commissioner Hunter is indisposed this afternoon, so she won't be joining us on the live streaming.
All right.
She's apologised for that.
Yep.
Uncle, I want to come back to your song, The Stolen Generation, and you mentioned that you were a small part of the stolen generation. So
Yeah.
would you tell the commissioners what happened to you when you were 10 years old?
Yeah, I was taken from Greenvale and I was put in a police car. Mum and Dad were away, but my elder sister was home with us. And the police came and they grabbed me and put me in the car. And in the car there was a 3-month-old baby and a 3-year-old baby. And they took us away and they dropped them off at Ballarat and they took me through to Royal Park. And I was there. I wasn't there for a long time, but any time away from your natural environment and your family, and you know, not ever being away from home by yourself at that age, yeah, it sort of was pretty hard. The 3-year-old girl I seen not so long ago at a cousin of mine's funeral who fought so hard for the stolen generation. She died 2 days before Minister Jennings allocated $10 million for the stolen generation. And my cousin died 2 days before that happened. And at her funeral, I met up with the 3-year-old girl that was in that police car. And that was the first time I'd seen her in 62 years. And I met up with the boy when after 34, he was 34 years old when I seen him next. So, Lake Condamine, I said earlier, I think there's probably about 26 people I know that were taken from Lake Condamine. And as time went on, and I think after that then their children were taken. and then after that their children were taken. So there's generations of Aboriginal kids being taken into the system, you know, and I don't know how that happens, you know, how that happens. It's just a repetitive act of injustice towards the first lot of people that were taken, and then their kids, and then their kids' kids, and there's generations of. And it's the same as unemployment. Generations and generations of unemployment people are around because there's no opportunities for them to better themselves. But in the case of the stolen generation, it was just an ongoing thing, and it's still happening today. Whether it's been done by Aboriginal foster care or whatever, that child is still taken from its natural parents. And I don't know the answers. I don't know the answers. But it's a thing that's recurring still. And, you know, some might say, well, at least they're going to Aboriginal foster care. But is that the answer? Is that the answer? I don't know whether that's the answer. Do we have to work harder to try and reinstate kids back into where they, you know, their families, their home environment, with their own siblings, and not be split up and all that sort of thing? I have no idea, but I tell you what, it's a big concern. It's a big concern. I don't know the answer. But it's been happening for such a long time, and, you know, and like everything else that's been happening, it's been happening for such a long time. And where's the cut-off point? You know, do we just become part of a system that, oh yeah, but, you know, the excuse being, oh yeah, but it's been happening for so long? I don't know. You know.
The auntie who died the days before the stolen generation reparation payments were authorised, did her family receive any money?
Not a thing. Not an absolute thing. Like, you know, and they're still in pain. They are still in pain. And I see them nearly every day when I'm home, parts of the family. And they got absolutely nothing, and there was no opportunity for them to even address the issue with government on if they could be given some sort of compensation. And, you know, it's just, it seems that, you know, that it's happened and there's no help here and all that sort of thing, and there's nothing we can do about it, you know. It seems so, well, it's wrong. It's morally and criminally wrong what they're doing to us as a people, you know. And there's a lot of things that's happened to Aboriginal people over the years that's morally and criminally wrong, and the injustices just keep going on. And, you know, you go back to the Aboriginal deaths in custody, and you go there, and you go to the Don Dale issue, and you go to, you know, a whole lot of other things that have happened. You know, a policeman fronts court for shooting an Aboriginal, and then a week later someone else shoots another Aboriginal. You know, so where does it end?
Just coming back to your experience as a 10-year-old, do you remember much about that?
Not a lot. Not a lot. Maybe I mentally blocked it out. I don't know. Maybe I did. I remember standing up. I don't know what I was standing on. It might have been on a cupboard or something, and looking out the window. And I seen this bloke walking past, and I was singing out to him, and I sort of. That's one sort of vision that I have in my head. But I don't know. I sort of, and I don't even know how long I'd been away. It may not have been such a long time. Maybe it wasn't such a long time. But you know, as I said, you take someone away from an environment that they're so used to, and you put them in isolation by themselves, and you know, it traumatises people. I don't know how long I was away, but I came back and I think I was given back in the magistrates' court in Hayward, I think. But I'm not sure of that either. But I think it was. I'm sure. Yeah, maybe it was the magistrates' court in Hayward.
And do you think your parents being away at the time was connected to your being taken?
Yeah, but I know instances where children were taken when their mothers and fathers were there as well. You know, so both my mother and father were pretty strong, and I think that maybe if they were there, I wouldn't have got taken. They wouldn't have got taken.
Mm. And what about your cousins?
Well, that whole family was taken. That whole family was taken, you know. The elder sister was the only one that wasn't taken, and but the rest of them all were. The other sisters and her brother and all that sort of thing. And their mother ended up living with us. And Ronnie, he was from that family. He met another cousin of mine in the orphanage, and when he asked the other cousin what his name was, and he told Ronnie who he was, he said to Ronnie, he said, "But my mother's dead, my family's dead." And Ronnie said to him, his name was Lloyd. He said, "No," he said, "your mother's living with Auntie Emma Lovett at Greenvale. And she'd been living with us. And all the time, even in the orphanages, people would tell them that their parents were dead, you know." So, and I can still remember the day that he came looking for his mother. And he found her, and I walked in the kitchen and he was there, standing there singing. And I was wondering who he was. And they said, "Oh, this is your cousin." And he was singing the song Whispering Hope. I don't know whether people know that song. Whispering Hope. Yeah, it's a hymn, isn't it? Yeah. And he was standing there singing that song. And that's the first time I'd seen him. Yeah. So, you know, I don't know. As I said, I don't know the answer to how you stop this sort of thing. And going back to, you know, Aboriginal people are becoming foster parents for Aboriginal kids. Is that the answer? I don't know whether that's the answer. You know.
Uncle, you talked about the generations. This was happening across the generations and still happening. Did your grandfather own personal property?
My grandfather.
Yep. Your grandfather had a radio set, things like that?
Sorry?
Your grandfather had a radio set, things like that?
Oh, yeah, Grandfather Foster. My mother's father. He was blind. He went blind, and I think he was coming back from Hamilton before that. He was coming back from Hamilton and watching the boys play up there, Uncle Monty and Uncle Hammy. And he was walking along the road going back to the mission, and he got hit by a car. And he was in the hospital for a little while, and then he went blind. And he was blind for a while, and they were living on Lake Condormission, and they were still getting rations, and he got a pair of boots, pair of socks, shoes, singlet and shirt, and a crystal set, wireless set, so that he could hear the wireless and things like that. And when he died, they come to Granny's house and took everything that he had, because he wasn't supposed to have it after he died. He couldn't. They had to give it back because it wasn't his in the first place. It belonged to the Queen, and there was an act that I'd read some time ago that stipulated that very thing. I said, "Wow, this is what happened to grandfather," and it was an actual act that was there. And the Act also said that Aboriginal persons could not give their possessions to anyone else. So if I went to Joe and said to him, "Listen, Joe, I haven't got a shirt, can you lend me a shirt?" By that act, he wasn't allowed to do it, because it wasn't his to give. And that's why they come and took grandfather's stuff.
Mm. So as well as controlling their personal property, their clothes and other items, there were other laws that affected them moving around.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us about that experience.
I think two of the laws I think that was most effectively used on Aboriginal people was the trespass law and the consorting law, where Aboriginals were roaming from town to town to look for work, and if they took refuge behind a church or something like that, and it happened a bit, the police would grab them and charge them with vagrancy. And if they didn't have, I think it was a silver coin, a threepence or something like that in their possession, then they would be hit with the vagrancy charge and put in jail for 7 days. And these sort of laws, and then the consorting laws. And Aboriginal peoples were picking up convictions because sometimes the legal system that was supposed to be representing them was actually aiding and abetting convictions against them by saying, if you don't plead guilty, if you plead guilty, you're going to get a lighter sentence, whether they were guilty or not guilty. So I think that the legal service, Aboriginal legal service that were supposed to be representing them at the time, was giving them the wrong advice, and they were actually chalking up convictions against themselves. And then the consorting law was that if you had a conviction, you wasn't allowed to. So brothers couldn't be with brothers, and you lived in the same house. So there were certainly things that were sort of manufactured out of the want to control people, and laws were made to control us more than any other peoples in this country.
Just coming back to the deaths in custody, you have a story about your brother-in-law's brother who died in Echuca.
Yeah, and he died there. He was living in Moama, and police knocked on his door, said, "You've got a $10 fine for being drunk last week or whatever. You need to come down to the police station, cut it out, cut the fine out." He said, "Okay, is it all right if I walk?" They said, "Yeah." Drove off, left him, down he went. They locked him up at 11:30, I think, and by 12:30 or something like 2:30, they looked in on him. He was having problems, medical problems. They took him to the hospital, and he died over a $10 fine, being drunk. But when it was starting to happen, I even seen that law change a bit when it started to happen. And it hasn't changed that long ago, that law. where the being drunk is not an offence, and it was more because white fellas were getting drunk and playing up, and they weren't getting arrested. But you know, back in the day, if a black fella was drunk, it's different. You lock them up. But that law has been changed now. You know.
You spent some time at the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a field officer.
I worked there for a little while.
So tell us about that work.
I was a Metropolitan Field Officer there for about 6 months on a temporary basis. And when people got arrested in Victoria, I was getting the first phone call. And it was such a, you know, sometimes I would walk into my sister's place. I was staying with her at the time, and I'd be walking in the door as they was walking out the door to go to work. You know, so there's that much pressure out there, you know, with Aboriginal people, and I think when Aboriginal peoples, Aboriginal families get a stigma of being always in the eyes of the police and things like that, then they are targeted all the time. Their kids get targeted, you know, the grandkids get targeted, and I think it's a continuation of well, like I was saying before, it just goes on and on. Generations of things happen to generations of people. I remember some of the cousins that first came here to Fitzroy when they left Lake on the mission, and the mission was getting closed. They had nowhere to go. They came down here, and they were sleeping in doorways in empty boxes here in Fitzroy. You know, or empty cars, broken down cars. You know, so, and it's a continuation again of generations of suffering for the same thing, you know.
So you did something about that with the hostel?
Sorry?
With the hostel?
Yeah, the George Wright Hostel was up here in Gore Street, run by Aboriginal Hostels Limited, and I put in for the job there and got it. And at the time, the house, the two-storey house that we had, was under renovations and it had no electricity and all that sort of thing, and so Aboriginal hostels were just down in Smith Street. And I'd go down there and say, you know, what's happened with electricity and all that, and oh, it's coming. Nearly every day I was in the city trying to get the electricity switched on. They left me to sort of manage it the best way I could. So I had a builder in there and he was doing 2 jobs, and I had to say to him, well, listen mate, you know, you're here under contract. If you don't finish this job by the time that contract's up, you're not getting paid.
Yeah. Just pardon me, Uncle,
Yeah.
I just want to check with
Yeah.
Commissioner Atkinson if there was a question.
Yes, thank you, Senior Counsel. I just wanted to go back to, you mentioned before Echuca.
Yeah.
So, and I know the person here we're talking about, Harrison Day.
Yeah.
I grew up with Harrison. I
Yep.
went to school with him, played footy.
Yep.
You know, so he played with Miami.
Yep.
He was a champion footballer. And I know of the incident that happened in Echuca. He was locked up in jail. And he was a death in custody, of course.
Yep.
And one of the many deaths in custody that the Royal Commission looked into. But I was wondering, was there an inquest or anything into death or a finding?
There was a coroner's report. I've read the coroner's report. Tommy, his brother, is married to my sister, of course.
You're right. Yeah.
He had it, and he asked me to read it. Yeah. So I read the coroner's report. He was also a good horseman, wasn't he?
Yeah, he used to ride his horse in to play for
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Did anything come from the coroner's report, Uncle?
No, not really. Yeah, probably just a mishap, or what do they call it, death by misadventure or something like that, maybe, yeah. There was nothing there that sort of looked, not even the time frame as when he was last checked on and all that sort of thing. Didn't seem to draw attention to anything, you know what I mean? Yeah.
So, just so people understand who are following this, what is it about separation? What is it about incarceration? Incarceration difficult for everybody, but what is it that's particularly difficult about incarceration for First Peoples?
Sorry?
What's incarceration's difficult for everybody?
Yep.
What is it that's so particularly difficult for First Peoples, First Nations peoples, about being jailed?
I think there's a cultural aspect of it, as well as being sometimes not really sure of why you're being jailed, and the lack of representation by legal firms or Aboriginal legal services or whatever to really put the shoulder to the wheel, so to speak. And I think the cultural aspects earlier on, with people earlier on, you know, in my age group and things like that, it became a spiritual thing as well, being isolated from your area, from your families, from your cultural area, you know, and being in places that, you know, was pretty foreign to people who had never been there before. I think it's pretty daunting. Yeah.
From your work as a field officer, did you find that phone call connection when people were arrested, was that helpful? Was that helping people?
I think it did for a while. And then I think the ball was dropped, and I was working for a community, what was it, PJ Justice committees, community justice panels. They were all over Victoria,
Yeah.
and I think the ball was ended up getting dropped there, because I think the police itself really didn't care in the end. Not so long ago, probably about 8 months ago, a nephew of mine was locked up in Hamilton Police Station, and he'd been locked up for 8 hours before I found out he was in the locker. And when I went to inquire to the police about it, the two arresting officers were on holidays, and the sergeant was going to speak to them when they came back, and he wanted to just tell me, oh look, I've spoken to him, reprimanded him about it, and it's all sorted. I said, well, it's not all sorted. It happened, you know. Why do you think Aboriginal deaths in custody had a Royal Commission, you know, for the very things that you just happened? So I think police are sort of dropping the ball as well, you know. And just the other day, actually, my wife and my niece were down at the lake having a coffee. There's a car next to them with the door open, 2 baby car seats in the back, and no one to be seen. Rang the police twice, and they came and had a look at the car, shut the car door and said, yeah, it's all fixed now. Yeah, so I rang the superintendent of police in Hamilton. I know him pretty well. I rang him and I said, you know, what's going on? And he talked to my wife and that. And in the end, he said, look, I'll get on to this. And he rang one of the chiefs. And the other day, the chief rang me back and talked to me about it. And I said, you know, what worries me is this. Was it because 2 Aboriginal women reported that incident, that the police took so long to get there? And when they did and they got there and there's 2 Aboriginal women there, they sort of just dismissed it, closed the door and said, oh, the case is over, it's okay. You know, so little incidents like that, you know what I mean, really, really makes you sort of, you know, sort of aware that, you know, things are not quite what they should be. So it turned out that the woman and the 2 kids were okay. My niece, who worked in child protection, she was concerned because there was 2 baby seats in the back of the car. There's a woman walking around near a lake with 2 kids. You don't know what state of mind she was in, you know. And the door were open of the car. So she must have been under a little bit of pressure to walk away with 2 kids and leave the door open. So yeah, and the police weren't really that good with that issue. But I had a call from their senior, and he was going to look into it, and he's going to get back to me. Yeah.
Did he get back to you?
No, I've come down here. So
Oh,
this
okay.
only happened
Recent.
the other day. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm.
So you know, there's lots of little things that sort of go on, and you can see there is not that. You know, things aren't just quite where they should be.
Mm. After the Stolen Generations apology, well, sorry, go back a step. You were invited to Canberra for the apology.
I was, yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell the commissioners about that?
Yeah, I was
Going
in
up.
Canberra and the Stolen Generation, and me and Joey's father went up, and we sat in the gallery, and there were that many people. I don't know if anyone here was there, but there was that many people in Sydney, and there was that many wearing red, black and yellow. You didn't know who was Aboriginal and who wasn't. You know, it was just one big sea of red, black and yellow. And when Rudd delivered the sorry speech, the atmosphere was so thick you just about cut it with a knife, and you could see the effect that it had on people, you know, that something is happening, And I seen some pretty tough men from different places, you know, and Aboriginal men, and they were sitting there crying, and you know, that really said something, because these guys, some of these guys I knew, I think they were made of iron, you know, and they were pretty tough. So they themselves were probably part of the Stolen Generation. But then what happened? We waited 5 years and then nothing happened. You know, so we get so far, and then when we think we're on a roll, you know, the carpet's pulled out from underneath us, you know, and then we're back to being black.
You talked about the impact on some of the members of the Stolen Generation. What about the impact you saw on their families or the siblings who weren't taken away?
Yeah, pretty heavy, because some of those people died, you know, and yeah, it was pretty heavy. Look, I don't think there was a dry eye anywhere out the front of Parliament House that day in Canberra by white or black people. I think the only unity that I've ever seen like that was 1988, when they walked across the Sydney Harbour Bridge. You know? Yeah. So, I mean, you know, it seems to be the system that we're fighting all the time. You know, a system that can change things like that if they want to. You know, but it seems that they need to be nearly begged to all the time to change it, you know. So,
well, you've told us about a few of your fights to have things happen. Do you feel like you're empowered to make things happen, to change things?
yeah, maybe I do. Maybe I do. Maybe I'm fighting for my father, and all these other things come into place around it, and I see things that I didn't probably see before. But when I look at it as a collective overview of what I'm trying to do, and you know, the letters patents of Victoria says it all.
For this commission?
Yes. You know, there is opportunities for change. You know, people can be brought to justice and questioned on this, that and whatever. The human rights of this country, you know, Australia was one of the first countries to sign off on the human rights, but it's never enacted it on my behalf, or the Stolen Generation's behalf, or Aboriginal people's death in custody's behalf. You know, so the things that they needed to change for the betterment of us is in place under the letters patent, but no one's bothered to implement them.
Can I come back for a moment to country and the native title and World Heritage listing? So tell us about Budjabim.
Budjabim, yeah. Well, there's a great history in our history of that area, of what it was and who it was and all that sort of thing, and the stories connected to it. And there was a story that's a little bit similar to the Bowendict as well, and it talks about giants. And there was a giant at Budjabim that was not too friendly with the Aboriginal men, and he was killing them and eating them and things like that. So the women asked him for a meeting, and they said, we'll catch this giant now. So we had a meeting, and they picked out the area where he was going to sit, and they put all these snakes in that area. So they sat down there and they had the meeting with him, and the snakes bit him and he died. So the women then dragged him from there down to the coast and floated him out to sea. And he became Julia Percy Island, or Dienmar.
Denmark.
Dienmar, yeah. So Dienmar is the launching pad for our spirit to the Dreamtime. Yeah. So that's the story that connects that to that.
Were you involved with the work, the native title work, and the UNESCO listing for the area?
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us about the World Heritage listing first.
Yeah, there's two parts to the World Heritage. There was first of all the National Heritage, which happened in 87. 87. I left hostels here in Fitzroy and I went to manage Lake Honda at that time. And then we actually got National Heritage at that time. So the World Heritage is a part of what was put in place back then. And it was about the fish traps and the stone houses and the way it was structured and the fact that some of them buildings, the stone houses and the fish traps, that they were older than the pyramids and all that sort of thing. So that's what's done that. Lake Honda back then, in the 80s, had fish traps, and summertime it would be all dry. You could walk across it like this here, like the floor, you know, and you would see all the structures of the stone fish traps. So people would come back again in the winter to see them actually working. So they see them in two stages, and that was the national heritage to that place then, because you could do that. It's changed a little bit now because the weirs have been built and things like that, and sometimes the water doesn't recede for 3 or 4 years, and you don't see that now. But it's a little bit of a pity really, because the attraction was to see it in the dry and in the wet, you know. And I had a school bus full of kids from Hayward, and some of the pools, when it was drying up, fish were still getting caught in the pools, and we was picking up big fish and carting them to deeper pools and things like that, and all these little kids were running around. I was, you know, really enjoying what they were doing, you know. It was an experience that they had that they'd never ever had before, probably never ever have again. You know, so it was very important. It was a very important part of the Lake Honda system, the ecosystem, you know.
With the stone houses you mentioned also on Lake, around Lake Honda.
Yeah. There's a lot of remnants now because people have run cattle on there and things like that, so cattle rub up against buildings and things like that and sort of destroy it, and so a lot of that sort of happened too. But you know, I think that that they can be sort of reconstructed, especially the fish traps. If people they belong to families, you know, families had them and things like that, and they was built at all different heights and things like that. But you know, if a family had it, and I said to my family, come on, we'll go down and sort of do some repairs on the fish trap and things like that, and you do that. But then again, the laws of what entitles you to do that under the laws of native title may be a little bit different. I don't know, you know. So we still don't sort of have maybe it's the prescribed body corporates that are in charge of doing that instead of families like it used to be in traditional times.
Do you have access to those remnants, the houses and the eel traps, or are they on private property?
No, we have access to them. Yeah, we have access to them. But the only trouble is too, so does everyone else. So does everyone else. And in some cases now we've found that there's wild pigs running around there because some of the shooters who love shooting pigs go up north, get the suckers, piglets, bring them back and release them in the bush. And they're doing the same with the deer, you know. So all of a sudden we've got vermin running all through the area.
I wanted to ask you about a case, a legal case that was brought to preserve relics in the 1980s by your cousin, Christina Saunders,
Mm.
and Sandra Onus,
Oh, yeah.
the Alcoa decision.
Yeah,
So can you tell the commissioners about that case and what
that was
those women were fighting for?
Yeah, and Alcoa was established in Portland on the coast there, and it started to do part of their buildings on Aboriginal cultural sites. So Sandra and Tina went through the high courts and put up a good battle and got a case. They won a case against Alcoa.
And the case confirmed that they had standing
Yes,
to object and protect the relics because of their connection to land.
yes, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was a great win for the Gunditjmara people, but it was also a great win for Aboriginal people. You know, anything today, I think, anywhere in Australia where an Aboriginal group or an Aboriginal clan or whatever is awarded justice for its heritage and continuing connection to country, I think it's a win for everyone. Yeah.
That was the first case, or one of the first cases, that established the connection of Aboriginal people to their lands,
Yeah.
long before Mabo.
Yes.
And did those women have assistance in bringing that claim?
Yeah, yeah. And in the end, there was a corporation formed, and the state sort of got behind it. But some of the things I think that sort of happened was the state left it a little bit wanting for things to become better than what they could have been, and things like that. You know, Alcoa, I think, didn't really meet the requirement of what it should have. There were some positions for Aboriginal employment. That was pretty sparingly. I don't know if there was ever any more than 3 people worked there, Aboriginal people worked there. And there was monies that Alcoa was supposed to pay to the Kerep-Jamara organisation, and I think the state ended up getting some of the not royalties, what do you call it, of the agreement that was made by Alcoa and the Kerep-Jamara.
The state ended up with some of those.
Yeah, and I think in the end, the state may have paid the Kerep-Jamara rather than the Alcoa paying it. So I think there was a little bit of that. But
Could I ask you to reflect on that issue of companies using resources and what you would say the local people, the First Nations people, are entitled to out of that use of resources from the land and the sea?
Yeah. Well, look, you know, I think we've sort of been hoodwinked a little bit here in the state of Victoria. When you look at other places around Australia where mining has taken place and royalties is paid to Aboriginal communities for works being done on their land and things like that. And I think the concept of it may be that people seem to think that you have to have a mining issue going on to receive royalties. And they think that only royalties come from mining. That's the only way you can get royalty. But I don't believe that people, you know, have explored the possibility, well, outside of mining, there is other financial things that are going on in your country that you can benefit by, and you have a right to benefit by because the country's still yours. And I don't know that we've had a fair sort of hand in anyone coming and sort of giving us the opportunities to go there with royalties and things like that for use of the land. Yeah, and as I said, you know, people think that the only way you can get royalties is if you're mining, and there's no mines here, so to speak. You know, they're all up the top end.
Let's just ask you about the native title claim. So it's known as Lovett on behalf of the Gunditjmara people and the state of Victoria. So did you have a role in that? Your family had a role in that?
Yeah, it was me, yeah, had the right, yeah.
Yeah. So tell us about that native title claim.
Well, it's sort of, native title claim was going on and we sort of knew about it, and then what sort of happened was there wasn't a lot sort of going on in the areas of trying to get native title to anywhere. So there was a stipulation of time when you either had to apply in such a time or otherwise it wasn't going to happen. So there was 5 of us that sort of got together and started the ball rolling, and we went and had a look at what we could do, and so we filed for a native title, and we sort of put a blanket claim right across the southwest, and we done it for the purpose of we only had a specific time when to get the title application in, and there was a little bit of concern by other groups who said, oh, you know, you've put native title on our country, and we sort of said, well, you know, the answer to that is if we can get the cake and cut it up, it's better than you getting the crumbs, isn't it?
And did that process work well for you?
Well, I think it did. I think it did. I think there were some grey areas of concern, and Section B, I think, in the Gunditjmara native title, where there was Eastern Maar and Gunditjmara, there was a little bit of an issue there, but I think it wasn't such a big issue as people thought it would be, or was. I think traditionally it was a shared area by the 2 peoples, the Eastern Maar and Gunditjmara, and I think that could have been as simply as that. You know, an agreement on that could have been as simple as that. I'd never disputed the Eastern Maar side of that Section B ever, you know, and it's only later on when things sort of got going with native title, there was a bit of a hiccup between the 2. But other than that, I think native title has done some of what it was set out to do. I don't think it's done all of it. I think, you know, native title to me sort of says that I don't know where you have land and you have no one living on it, and where native title is a place where people can come home and establish their connection to country and actually live there. And that I see hasn't happened. And
So that requirement of having to prove the connection to the country, has that caused problems in some cases?
well, I suppose when you think that I was a little bit confused when we sort of applied that why did we have to approve connection of country from 1788 to current day when we've been recognised as a peoples for 60,000 years, and our artwork is in ranges and it's found all over the place. The fish traps, the stone houses, and certainly predates 1788. So I couldn't understand that time frame of 1788 through to current day, and and of course the fact that we had to prove connection to country when there was tribes all around each other who could verify and point the finger at each other and say he existed, he existed, he existed, and he existed before white settlement, and I can't understand why that method wasn't used.
And just in terms of the outcome, there was native title recognised over about 1,400 square kilometres of land in that case. And are you able to go on all of those lands?
Personally, I'm quite comfortable in lands that I know that is very closely connected to me.
Yeah.
I don't go on other people's lands. If it was another clan, I still believe that today. I don't go there, or I don't interfere there. So, when you get an allocation of land, and just anyone, as long as they're Wundis Jamara or whatever, can go there. I mean, when the determination was given at Mount Eccles, as it was then, by Justice North, there were 600 people there. Some of the families that were there hadn't set foot on that area in 100 years. So I think there could have been a better sort of, how do you say it? You can be associated to country by birth, and like I said yesterday, just because you're born on country doesn't mean to say you belong to country. So I think there need to be a little bit better things happening there, and I mean how and then you look at the Yoorrook, and how does the time wash away the signs of history? How does time wash that away, and people be denied of their lands because a system that's not familiar with us, or we're not familiar with it, makes a ruling that time has deleted your connection to this country.
Thank you, Aunt Korjani. Is that a good time for a break?
A break
Thank you.
for a finish.
Well, maybe I'll check with Uncle Johnny.
Yeah, might be better to come back, do you think?
We'll just have a very quick break if we
Yeah.
may,
Yeah.
just 5 minutes.
How
Yeah.
you going, you all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going all right.
We can have a...
We just have 5 minutes and I might have a word to Uncle.
Yep. Dan, please. Yoorrook, Justice.